The aroma of sizzling ribs filled the air as I stood at my backyard grill, flipping over a perfect cut of brisket. The juices dripped onto the searing metal, creating a symphony of sounds and smells that made me appreciate life's simple joys. It was a peaceful evening, the kind that makes you forget about the chaos of the world, until I heard the dreaded sound of her voice. Unauthorized smoke detected. You are in violation of Section 4, subparagraph 12 of the HOA bylaws. I sighed. Here we go again. Before I could even put down my tongs, the gate to my backyard flew open, and a group of clipboard-wielding HOA members barged in. They were dressed in what could only be described as homemade uniforms, complete with cheap plastic badges pinned to their polo shirts. "Step away from the grill," barked a pudgy man with a receding hairline and a clipboard clutched tightly in his hand. "This is an HOA-mandated smoke inspection." I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." The woman who had started it all, Margaret, stepped forward. She was wearing a smug grin and a bright orange vest labeled HOA Enforcement. Her eyes gleamed with the kind of self-righteousness that only someone with too much power and too little common sense could possess. "We've received multiple complaints about your smoke patterns," she said, sniffing the air dramatically as if detecting some imaginary toxin. "Unauthorized barbecue activity is a serious offense in this neighborhood. As the HOA president, I have the authority to shut this down immediately." I chuckled, assuming she was joking. But she wasn't. "Ma'am, this is my property. I'm literally just cooking dinner." She gasped as if I had just admitted to running an underground crime syndicate. "You think the HOA doesn't have jurisdiction here? Our regulations override city ordinances. I have the right to enforce environmental safety standards." She turned to her self-appointed officers, 2 retired accountants and a teenager who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, and barked, "Confiscate the grill." That's when I realized she was serious. One of the officers actually stepped toward my smoker, clipboard raised like a weapon. "Ma'am, if you touch that grill, I promise you're going to regret it," I said, my voice calm but firm. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening an official? That's a federal offense." I blinked. "No, it's not." She huffed. "Well, it should be." She pulled out a stack of HOA citations, scrawling my name onto them at an alarming speed. "You'll be hearing from the board. Expect a fine of no less than $500. I crossed my arms. For what? Unauthorized smoke emissions? Environmental hazards? Failure to comply with HOA grilling regulations? She handed me the ticket like it was a warrant for my arrest. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Margaret, you do realize this is all nonsense, right?" "We'll see what the courts think," she said smugly. "I have the full authority of the Homeowners Association behind me." That's when I smiled. "Oh, Margaret," I said, flipping open my wallet and flashing my actual badge. "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." Her smug grin flickered for just a second before returning with defiance. "Nice try. That's fake. No real cop would waste his time with a barbecue." I smirked. "That's cute. I happen to be Detective Nathan Carter, Vice Squad." Her face paled. "You're impersonating an officer, illegally issuing fines, and trespassing," I continued, pulling out my phone and dialing a familiar number. "So, let me make this easy for you. You leave now, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you walk away without cuffs." The silence that followed was delicious. But, of course, Margaret had to make things worse for herself. "You don't scare me," she snapped. "The HOA is more powerful than any police force." That's when my call connected. "Hey, Captain. I need a few units at my address. We've got some wannabe cops trying to play law enforcement." Margaret's bravado cracked. You can't do that." I gave her a slow, deliberate grin. "Oh, but I can. And trust me, Margaret, this is only the beginning." Margaret wasn't just any HOA president. She was a dictator in a floral print blouse and orthopedic sandals. The self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, she saw herself as a sheriff, judge, and executioner all wrapped into one smug, self-important package. Over the years, she had built her own twisted little empire, turning the HOA into a tyrannical regime that terrorized homeowners. If there was even a slight deviation from her so-called standards, she would rain down citations, fines, and threats of legal action. Every house had to be exactly the right shade of beige. Christmas lights? Only pre-approved ones. and they had to come down by January 2nd at noon. Lawn gnomes. Bird feeders? Regulated. One poor guy down the street once got fined for having a garden hose that was too long. And now, apparently, she had added smoke pattern control to her never-ending list of absurd, self-imposed HOA laws. Margaret wasn't in it for the betterment of the community. No, this was about control. Her HOA wasn't just a group of concerned neighbors. It was a full-fledged racket, complete with fabricated rules, ridiculous fines, and even a secret informant network. She had minions, HOA officers who took their roles way too seriously, patrolling the neighborhood with their clipboards and measuring tape, looking for any excuse to issue citations. These weren't just busybodies with too much time on their hands. They were enforcers. And Margaret? She was the ringleader. I had heard stories about her before, but I'd never been on her radar until now. And it was clear she had a personal vendetta against me. Maybe it was because I had the audacity to enjoy my own backyard. Or maybe it was because I hadn't attended one of her ridiculous HOA meetings. But now that she had me in her sights, she was determined to make my life miserable. As I stood in my backyard, watching Margaret hand out fake citations like candy at a parade, I saw the gleam in her eyes, the look of someone who thought she had absolute power. She strutted around like she owned the place, completely oblivious to the fact that she was about to pick a fight she couldn't win. Margaret's rapid response team arrived in golf carts, dressed in matching khaki shorts and polo shirts. They looked like a geriatric SWAT team, complete with oversized sunglasses and one guy with a whistle around his neck like he was about to officiate an Olympic event. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. This was Margaret's idea of backup, a bunch of retirees in golf carts. They skidded to a stop in front of my house, leaping out like a group of accountants pretending to be special forces. "We got here as fast as we could," said a tall, lanky man with a salt and pepper mustache. Margaret nodded gravely. "Good. We have a code red." His eyes widened. "A code red? That's serious." I snorted. "Oh yeah, extremely serious. Apparently, grilling on my own property is now a felony." The man turned to look at me for the first time, squinting. "So, this is the perpetrator?" Margaret nodded firmly. "Detective Nathan Carter. He thinks the law doesn't apply to him." I raised my hands in mock surrender. Oh no, the horror. The audacity. A man daring to cook food in his own backyard. The mustache man scowled. "Don't play coy. You know exactly what you did." I tilted my head. "Enlighten me." He whipped out a laminated printout. "According to subsection 7B of the HOA Environmental Protection Initiative, your smoke emissions have exceeded the acceptable HOA threshold. Your grilling equipment violates the aesthetic uniformity clause, and," he pointed accusingly at my lawn, "your grass is precisely 0.5 inches longer than regulation length." I blinked. "Are you serious?" Margaret smirked. "Deadly." I ran a hand down my face. "Margaret, you're literally making up new charges on the spot." She gasped in fake outrage. "How dare you?" The mustache man stepped forward. "We're authorized to take immediate action." I sighed. "Oh yeah? And what action is that?" Margaret smiled cruelly. "We're shutting you down." Before I could even react, one of the officers dramatically pulled out a roll of yellow caution tape and started stringing it across my backyard. I burst out laughing. "Are you kidding me right now?" Margaret nodded seriously. "This area is now under HOA quarantine. No further grilling activity may take place until this matter is resolved in the next HOA board meeting." I grinned. "Oh, Margaret, you have no idea what you've just done." Because while she had called in her HOA enforcers, she didn't realize that I had already made a call of my own. And as if on cue, I suddenly heard the deep rumble of an actual police cruiser rolling up the street. Margaret froze. The color drained from her face. "Oh, what's wrong, Margaret? I thought you wanted to get the authorities involved." She turned toward me, eyes wide. Who did you call?" I crossed my arms. "The real cops." The police cruiser pulled up slowly, stopping just outside my driveway. Two uniformed officers stepped out, both looking supremely uninterested in whatever HOA nonsense was about to unfold. I knew them both, Officers Rodriguez and Daniels. Rodriguez, a stocky guy with salt and pepper hair and an impressive scowl, looked around at the absurd scene before him. The golf carts lined up like a failed coup, the yellow quarantine tape haphazardly draped across my backyard. the clipboard-wielding retirees standing at attention like nervous soldiers. And then there was Margaret. She marched forward, clipboard clutched in one hand, the other gesturing dramatically as if she were leading a presidential press conference. "Officers, you're just in time," she announced. "We have a very serious situation that requires immediate legal action." Rodriguez sighed. "I really doubt that." Margaret ignored him, stepping aside and pointing directly at me like I was some kind of wanted fugitive. "This man is a repeat offender. He is violating numerous HOA regulations, endangering the integrity of the neighborhood, and has committed a blatant act of aggression against an HOA officer." Daniels, a tall, lanky guy who had mastered the art of looking exhausted, raised an eyebrow. "Aggression?" Margaret held up her hand dramatically, revealing the faint redness from where she had burned herself on my grill earlier. "Observe the evidence of his attack." There was a long pause. Rodriguez stared at her, then at me, then back at her. "Are you seriously trying to report a self-inflicted burn from touching a hot grill?" Margaret gasped in outrage. I was lured into a trap. Rodriguez looked at me. "She touched your grill?" I smirked. "Oh yeah, after I told her not to." Rodriguez nodded. "So, she grabbed an active grill, got burned, and now wants you arrested?" "Exactly," Margaret shouted. Rodriguez pinched the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, that's not how this works." Margaret's eye twitched. "Are you telling me you're refusing to enforce the law?" Daniels sighed. "Ma'am, what law?" Margaret huffed and dramatically shoved her thick binder into Rodriguez's hands. "All of them. He has violated multiple subsections of the HOA governance code." Rodriguez flipped it open, skimmed a few pages, then promptly shut it with an audible clap. "Ma'am, this is an illegal document. This is a glorified scrapbook of nonsense." Margaret let out a strangled sound, like a tea kettle about to explode. "Excuse me." Rodriguez sighed again. "Let me explain something very, very slowly. The HOA is not a law enforcement agency." "See?" Margaret looked personally offended. "Well, it should be." Daniel snorted. "Lady, you were 3 minutes away from getting charged with wasting police resources." That cracked Margaret's facade. She immediately backpedaled, switching tactics. Okay, let's not be hasty. We're all reasonable adults here. Surely, we can come to a civilized agreement." Rodriguez folded his arms. "Oh, and what agreement are you suggesting?" Margaret turned to me, giving me the fakest, most passive-aggressive smile I had ever seen. "Detective Carter, if you simply pay the outstanding HOA fines and agree to cease all non-compliant activities, we can consider this matter resolved amicably." I laughed so hard I actually had to take a step back. "Margaret, let me make something very clear. I'm never paying your fake fines. I'm never complying with your nonsense. And in about 5 minutes, you're going to wish you had just walked away." Her smile faltered. "Threats, detective?" I smirked. "Oh no, not threats. Just facts." And right on cue, Rodriguez reached for his radio. Margaret's smug expression vanished instantly. "Wait, what are you doing?" Rodriguez clicked the button. "Dispatch, we've got a potential case of fraud and unlawful impersonation of an officer. Requesting backup." Margaret turned white as a sheet. "F fraud." I leaned in slightly, smirking. "You still think you're in charge here, Margaret?" She swallowed hard. "This is a misunderstanding. I was just trying to enforce order. You people don't understand how important community regulations are." Rodriguez sighed. "Ma'am, let me be blunt. Either you come with us now and cooperate, or we'll get a warrant and start digging through the HOA's financial records." Margaret made a sound that was somewhere between a squeak and a whimper. She looked at me, hatred burning in her eyes. "You will regret this, detective." I grinned. "Oh, Margaret, I think you're the one with regrets." Rodriguez grabbed his cuffs. "Ma'am, turn around." And that was the moment the HOA empire began to crumble. Margaret was cuffed, her overly dramatic shriek of outrage echoing across the neighborhood, scaring off a few birds and probably giving some poor dog a heart attack. "This is unlawful. I am the president of this community. You can't do this to me." Rodriguez sighed, completely unfazed. Yeah. You can scream about it all you want, but fraud is still fraud, ma'am." Daniels chuckled, watching as Margaret flopped like a fish, desperately trying to wriggle out of the cuffs. "Man, I've got to say, I've arrested drug dealers who went down with more dignity than this." Margaret twisted around. her face an angry shade of tomato red. "This is a travesty of justice." Rodriguez shrugged. "You know what's a travesty? Charging people hundreds of dollars in fake fines for unauthorized smoke emissions." I leaned against my grill, enjoying every second of Margaret's downfall. But the best part? It was only going to get worse for her. Because once the real cops started looking into her HOA's shady operations, they were about to uncover an entire web of corruption. As the police cruiser pulled away with Margaret in the back, the neighborhood erupted in cheers. People clapped, someone popped open a bottle of champagne, and a few kids even ran around waving pool noodles like they were celebrating the fall of a dictator. But me? I wasn't celebrating yet. Because while Margaret might have been the ringleader, she wasn't the only problem. The HOA itself, this ridiculous, corrupt, money-hungry racket, was still standing. And as much as I enjoyed watching Margaret get dragged off in cuffs, I wasn't satisfied yet. I turned to the group of neighbors who had gathered, their excitement still fresh but cautious. They were relieved, but also unsure. Because even though Margaret was gone, the HOA wasn't. And that's when I decided I was going to burn this entire operation to the ground. "All right, everyone, listen up," I said, stepping onto my porch and addressing the crowd. "We got rid of Margaret, but the fight isn't over." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The short woman with glasses, the one who had been fined for her non-regulation beige front door, stepped forward. "She's right, though. The HOA is still there. The board is still in power. The bylaws are still in place." A murmur of worry rippled through the crowd. A man in a baseball cap crossed his arms. "So, what do we do? Even without Margaret, the HOA still controls the neighborhood. They still have the authority to fine us, right?" I smiled. "Only if you let them." Confusion, uncertainty, but also hope. I turned to Rodriguez, who was standing by his squad car, listening in. "Hey, Rodriguez, just out of curiosity, if an HOA is found to be engaging in fraudulent activities, does the entire organization come under scrutiny?" Rodriguez smirked. "Oh, absolutely. And if a majority of homeowners vote to dissolve an HOA, can it be legally shut down?" Rodriguez nodded. "Yep. If 67% of the homeowners vote for dissolution, the HOA gets disbanded." I turned back to the crowd. "Then let's vote." A silence fell over the group. A man in the back, the same guy who had been fined for having an old car in his driveway, blurted, "You serious?" I smirked. Dead serious. That's when the energy shifted. People who had been worried just minutes ago started smiling. They looked at each other, realizing that for the first time in years, they actually had power. Margaret wasn't here to intimidate them anymore. Her ridiculous rapid response team was gone. And now, they had the chance to take back their neighborhood. "All right," the woman with the beige doors said. "Then let's do it." The crowd roared in approval, and within minutes, we were gathering signatures. People ran to their houses, digging out old HOA agreements, flipping through bylaws, confirming the exact process for a dissolution vote. The legal jargon was a mess, but thankfully, one of the neighbors was a lawyer. "Oh, this is airtight," he confirmed, scanning through a stack of documents. "If we get enough votes, this HOA is gone." The signatures started rolling in. The old man with a classic car? Signed. The mother who had been fined for her stroller? Signed. The couple who had been forced to repaint their fence 3 times? Signed. People were racing to sign their names, and as the list grew longer, the remaining HOA board members, Margaret's former cronies, started to panic. A thin, rat-faced man in a button-up sweater vest came running out of his house, waving his hands. Wait. Let's not be hasty here." I turned to him. "Oh? And why not?" He cleared his throat, clearly sweating. We can't just throw away years of carefully structured governance. The HOA provides stability, order." I laughed. "Buddy, this carefully structured governance just got your president arrested." His face turned red. But we still have responsibilities. Who will enforce the law and regulations? Who will ensure the architectural unity of the neighborhood?" The teenager in the back of the crowd shouted, "Dude, nobody cares." Laughter erupted, and more signatures rolled in. Ratface wasn't giving up. "If you dissolve the HOA, property values will plummet. Do you really want this neighborhood to fall into chaos?" A woman in yoga pants scoffed. "Oh, please. Property values won't drop just because you're not handing out $500 fines over mailbox color. I turned to Rodriguez. Officer, do you see any legal reason why this HOA should continue to exist? Rodriguez shrugged. No. If the people voted out, it's gone. Ratface twitched. He knew he was losing. This is a mistake, he muttered. I grinned. No, this is justice. And at exactly 4:17 p.m. that afternoon, we hit the 67% threshold. The moment the final signature was added to the petition, a massive cheer exploded through the crowd. The HOA was officially dead. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood belonged to the people again. Rodriguez gave a low whistle. Well, damn. That was fast. I smirked. Margaret ruled with fear. Without her, these guys don't stand a chance. Ratface slumped into defeat, and the remaining board members scattered like roaches. I walked back to my grill, flipping another burger as the celebration erupted around me. Someone cranked up music, people started dancing in the street, and kids rode their bikes around, free from HOA harassment. And as I took a victory bite of my perfectly cooked steak, I couldn't help but smile. Because now it was truly over. Or so I thought. Just as I was about to relax, my phone buzzed. It was a call from the city. Detective Carter, I answered. Hey, detective. We've got something you might want to look into. Turns out your HOA isn't the only corrupt one in town. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, we've got reports of 3 more HOAs running similar scams. You interested? I grinned, flipping another burger. Oh, absolutely. Because nothing tastes better than justice. Except maybe ribs. The next morning, I stood outside the Oak Ridge HOA headquarters, watching as my team moved into position. This was it, the grand finale. The Oak Ridge HOA wasn't just some petty suburban dictatorship. It was the head of the snake, the most powerful, most corrupt HOA in the entire city. It controlled over 500 homes, pulled in millions of dollars in fees every year, and had deep connections to city officials, real estate developers, and even law firms that helped them cover up their schemes. And today, it was going down. At exactly 10 a.m., we moved in. Squad cars pulled up in front of the Oak Ridge HOA's gated office, lights flashing. Monroe and I stepped out, badges on display. Waiting for us was the HOA president, Stanley Whitmore, a tall, bald, pinstriped suit-wearing snake of a man who looked like he was born in a country club and had never mowed his own lawn in his life. Detective Carter, he said smoothly. To what do I owe this unexpected visit? I held up the search warrant. We're here to go through your records, Stanley. Financial statements, HOA fees, homeowner complaints, the works. His smile twitched. That won't be necessary. I smirked. Oh, it absolutely is. Behind me, officers began entering the building, demanding access to HOA files. Stanley stepped forward, his smugness barely concealing the fear in his eyes. Detective, I think you'll find that our HOA is fully compliant with all city regulations. I pulled out a manila folder and tossed it onto the hood of his fancy sports car. It slid open, revealing dozens of fraudulent fines, bank statements, and records of missing HOA funds. Oh yeah, I said. Then maybe you can explain why $800,000 of homeowner fees magically disappeared into an unlisted community project fund that doesn't exist. Stanley's face drained of color. That's a misunderstanding. Monroe stepped forward, holding up more documents. And what about the homeowners you've been forcing out with fake liens for closing on their houses so you can sell them to developers at a profit? Stanley swallowed hard. Busted. Over the next few weeks, the fallout from the raids spread like wildfire. Multiple city officials were investigated for taking bribes from HOAs. Other corrupt HOA boards started resigning in panic, fearing they'd be next. Neighborhoods all across the county started filing for HOA dissolutions. And me? I was just getting started. Because if there was one thing Margaret had taught me, it was this. Power-hungry tyrants think they're untouchable. They think they can find people into submission, that no one can challenge their power. But today, I proved them wrong. A few weeks later, I was right back where it all started, at my grill, in my backyard, hosting a barbecue so big it could be seen from space. No fines, no citations, no clipboard-wielding enforcers knocking on my door. Just good food, good people, and a neighborhood that had taken back its freedom. Rodriguez raised a beer. Well, Carter, you did it. Took down the biggest HOA in the city. What's next? I smirked, flipping a steak. Oh, I hear there are still some Karen-infested HOAs in the next county over. He laughed. You're really going to make this a full-time gig? I took a slow sip of my drink, watching the smoke rise from the grill. Rodriguez, I said, grinning. I think I already have. Because if there was one thing I learned from all of this, there's nothing more dangerous than a power-tripping HOA, and nothing more satisfying than watching one burn. As the sun set on the neighborhood, I stood by my grill, flipping burgers and watching the smoke rise into the sky. The smell of victory, or maybe just well-seasoned ribs, filled the air. The neighbors had transformed my backyard into an impromptu block party. Tables were set up, beers were being passed around, and the sound of genuine, unrestrained joy filled the air. But just as I took a perfect bite of steak, Rodriguez walked up, shaking his head. You're enjoying this way too much. I grinned. Rodriguez, my man, you ever tasted freedom? He raised an eyebrow. Freedom? I gestured toward the grill. It tastes like ribs. He snorted, stealing one of the burgers off the plate. Well, enjoy it while it lasts. You might be free of Margaret's nonsense, but if what the city attorney told you is true, you've got bigger fish to fry. I nodded, chewing thoughtfully. Because he was right. Margaret's downfall had been just the beginning. The real battle? It was only just heating up. But for now, I was content to enjoy the moment. Because at the end of the day, justice is sweet, but justice with barbecue? That's legendary. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.